Film Trace. This is a podcast where we trace the life of a film from production. Wait, what do we do? No, conception to production, all the way to release and reception. We're keeping that. We're going.
That's what we do.
And so what are we doing today? This is kind of it's a bigger film. We've been waiting to do it, right? I guess this is a joint pick. It's really what started this whole self-aware horror cycle that we're doing. It is Scream 5. Is that the official title? Scream 5?
No, it's Scream. And there is a kind of an explanation, meta explanation in the film itself. It came out in theaters back in June, the resuscitation of the series that began with a film of the same name in 1996. And it's actually now available on VOD. So we are a little bit behind in restructuring our show, Film Trace, but this is officially the return, and we have a kind of ambitious plan that, yes, like Dan just said, is based around the fact that we knew we needed to kind of center it around this new Scream iteration. I don't know what requel is the term used in the film.
Can we ban that term from this podcast?
Was that created just for this script? Because that wasn't a term before the film, was it?
I read somewhere that someone had said it before somewhere else. That's what I had heard. I don't think it's the first usage of it. Yeah, exactly. Probably some nerd like myself on Reddit getting bored one day. So Scream 2022. Wow.
Oof.
I was really excited for this movie. I saw it opening night, Thursday night, the Thursday previews.
Man.
So I was super stoked for this whole thing. I mean, just to take a step back and think about it, I love the Scream movies. We talked about this on a couple of episodes, but I am a huge Wes Craven fan. Scream is one of my favorite movies. I rewatched every single Scream before this one, just to sort of get a feeling and get back into the vibe of the whole thing. And I don't know what your thoughts were, but I was pretty underwhelmed by Scream 2022. It just did not really, it didn't hit the right spot that I wanted to hit as like probably a big fan.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't know. And we'll get into sort of the details here, but I kind of want to know what your initial thoughts were of it.
Right. I think we're on the same track. I think there are scenes in the film that are exceptions to the overall end product.
Yeah.
I think that the closest I felt to that kind of visceral like excitement that the Scream franchise still has is probably that one. I mean, maybe just the one scene. I really enjoy the daytime kill with the character named Wes.
Oh yeah, of course.
And his mom. That is, I think, the closest the film gets to kind of recapturing that kind of wild spirit of the originals. And I think we should make it clear here, and it seems like it's pretty standard across the board. We went into it a little bit on Twitter, and it seems like the agreement is largely there that I would say pretty universal ranking is like 1, 2, 4, 5, 3, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's my ranking.
Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, did you get a chance to rewatch any of the old ones?
Just Scream 2, and I mean, I watched the original Scream every couple of years, but I remember like Scream 4 was definitely better than 3, but like I don't have a lot of interest in revisiting either of them, just like I don't think I'll have much interest revisiting this one.
Yeah, unfortunately. Let's give like an umbrella sort of review of Scream really quickly. I'll do it as quickly as I possibly can. Scream comes out in 1996, was Left for Dead opening weekend, did not do very well. Then all of a sudden, word of mouth kicked in, and it ended up being one of the bigger horror films of 96, 97, and that whole decade. It's one of the biggest horror films in the 1990s. Sequel comes out a year later, 1997. I remember this, sitting in people were sitting in the aisle seeing this movie. It was that big. That's a huge hit. Everybody, really well done. I think one of the better horror sequels ever. Scream 3 comes out in 2000. Not written by Kevin Williamson. Directed by Wes Craven, but different writer this time. does not do as well as the other movies, and I think is obviously what you said, universally kind of panned as the worst movie. And then 11 years later, we get Scream 4, which brought back Williamson and Wes Craven, was completely DOA on box office on the release. And like, this is one of those movies that like box office nerds still talk about today as being like such a terrible, out of nowhere, awful flop. And so that's one of the reasons why we didn't get a Scream 5 right away with Craven and Williamson. Why we're having like 11 years later. And obviously Wes Craven died in 2015. And so the production of the movie kind of, wasn't going anywhere, kind of hit a brick wall then. And then with the Harvey Weinstein stuff, essentially Scream, the property, was up for sale, and Spyglass brought it back in 2019. And that's how we at least got to this point. What about these guys, the directors here? Do you know their work, like Ready or Not?
Yeah. So, and that was perhaps one of the reasons why, I don't know, maybe I feel like I was in a little bit of the minority. I was also kind of underwhelmed by Ready or Not. It had a ton of buzz.
Yeah, so was I. Yeah.
And I didn't see it until it hit streaming. So I know I didn't get caught up in like the initial wave, and maybe it kind of had been hyped up a lot in my head. And I think once again, I think there's redeeming qualities to it. I think Samara Weaving was really awesome in it, way better than Melissa Barrera is in this movie. But
let's not dive into that.
Yeah, we'll save that. But it's clear that like these are clever guys, so it makes sense why they were tapped to put this together. Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillette. They seemingly, I don't know. I feel like one of my issues with Ready or Not that I still see with Scream 2022. Can we just call it Scream 5? Because I hate saying 2022.
Yeah, or it's Scream 5 because it technically is a sequel to all the other movies, so it's Scream 5.
Right. Is that like, while that cleverness is readily apparent, it doesn't ever kind of congeal to the point of like kind of satisfying narrative, right? There's no like fullness to it, and the writers, I think, are just as responsible for that as the directors. And you have Guy Busick, who also wrote Ready or Not, as well as episodes of Castle Rock, and then James Vanderbilt, who has a little more cred with
kind of spotty cred though.
Spotty cred, but
as a writer, Independence Day Resurgence. Ooh,
amazing.
Yeah. I mean,
true.
Zodiac obviously is different.
It's pretty much just Zodiac and the Suspiria remake. But it doesn't.
Movies.
Yeah, but it just doesn't track for an IP that is so beloved. But I mean, that's what we do with IPs, right? We scrape them out until they're shells of their previous selves.
Which is funny, but you say that, and like there's a quote from Harvey Weinstein about like him trying to get his brother to do Scream 5. He's basically like, we've milked that cow, is what he says.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, back then it felt milked, but now we're in the post Force Awakens world where you can just like regenerate a cow in the metaverse and keep milking it. You know what I mean? Like, it's sort of like, we're in a really weird space. I mean, it's like postmodern.
Right.
I don't know what's going on. And this movie definitely fits in that universe where you're sort of like, look, I was very excited they were doing it. Like you, Ready or Not to me was like very hyped in the horror world. I saw it. I was like, I don't get it. Like, I don't get what is so amazing about this. It felt very over the top. It felt completely unnuanced in a lot of different ways. Like lack of subtlety to the point of just like, what are you doing? And apparently that plays well with a certain group of people.
Right.
And it's cleverness for the sake of cleverness. And it's like, okay, like I'm not 15 anymore, like that doesn't impress me. And so I had kind of a weird feeling going into this one, but I don't know, like looking at the movie and going through all the quotes and how this thing got made, and Kevin Williamson was not on board because he only wanted to do with Wes, and Wes is now gone. He was upset about that, and they eventually got him around, by basically saying, as long as you dedicate this to Wes, like I'm on board as executive producer. It walks this weird fine line of trying to respect the original 4 films in Wes Craven and what he did in the horror genre. And then, trying to do something new but what did they, just thinking about it, what did they try to do new here, really? Like what? A lot of it, it feels like it was just fan service.
Mhm.
And when I saw it announced and stuff like that, I was like, I'm on board because I'm a huge fan. I'll go see it without a doubt. And, I'll be engaged and kind of like it for what it is. But even in like you look at the conception of this and how it came to be, I don't really see any other impetus here than sort of, oh, like let's get this fire burning again with these embers that we have left over, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Do you see
yeah.
anything? I mean, do you see anything in like what they're doing or what they're saying?
I mean, the one thing that stands out to me that if I was in the shoes of kind of regenerating that cow in the metaverse, which I would never do, uh, is that there is that kind of propulsion that stems from that nostalgia, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we got that somewhat with Scream 4, right? 11 years after Scream 3.
Yeah.
That nostalgia was already like brewing. But I think especially, I don't know if it was like the approaching 25th anniversary of the original in the franchise, or it's more just the matter of like the filmmakers today like are finally that generation that literally did grow up with the original Scream. There seems to be some kind of generational thing, right? Like you mentioned Force
Yeah.
Awakens. Abrams and Johnson did grow up with Star Wars, and then it kind of gets like the torch getting passed down, and that's
Yeah.
how influential the Scream franchise has become over the years.
True.
So on the one hand, like there's nothing new happening here, but it's just that old sense of trying to rekindle the chemistry and also trying to push it forward. So like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. And I mean, financially, it seems like they succeeded at that. Am I
Oh,
wrong?
100%. Yeah, this is a hit. Like there's already a sequel greenlit for I guess next year, isn't it? I think. Or at
Oh
least
boy.
whatever. They greenlit Scream 6. It's going to happen. It is funny that you said that though, because I remember the night after I saw this, I was kind of like let down by it. I was like, oh man, like I thought this was going to be better. And I thought about it that weekend. And it kind of popped into my head. I was like, oh, like this isn't for me. I'm almost 40. This movie came out when we were teenagers, essentially. It was massively important to both of us. But like this new version, Scream 5, I don't know if there's fan service involved for people like us, but it actually feels like it's more towards younger people. And
Right.
that's who showed up to see it. And that was always the big fear with this movie and doing another one. I think the problem with Scream 4 was this is young people didn't show up to see that one. But they
Right.
did come up to see this one. I think a lot of that had to be like the casting and how they sort of marketed it and everything. But it was successful from that perspective. But yeah, I think that's a really strong point. It's like, yeah, there's nothing new for us. But if you're 16 or 17 years old and you grew up with Scream, this is going to feel like something new, maybe, or it's going to feel like you're more connected to it. I don't know. Is that a valid argument?
Well, I would add that this year for my high school film studies class, I screened the original Scream,
Yeah.
and I had talked about it a little bit in the past, but it just seemed like there was such an appetite. Like I try to like gauge my students' interests to decide ultimately after we talk about a genre, then like what am I going to show them as like an example of the pinnacle of that genre. And so in the past, I've definitely mentioned Scream, but there hasn't been a lot of appetite, and so I never really chose it to screen it. And then I finally chose it this year because it just seemed like that was what was interesting to people. I think there's also just like pop culturally and fashion wise, there's a lot of increasing interest in the 90s as kind of having cultural cachet.
Yeah.
And so kind of looking back on that, it has this hipness to it that I do not think it had a decade ago or even 5 years ago.
No, that's true. That is fascinating too, because like even you look at something like we did an episode on the three Fear Street movies, and the first Fear Street movie is basically a ripoff of Scream. I mean, ripoff,
Yeah.
whatever. homage to Scream. I mean, very much indebted to that slasher 90s aesthetic.
Right.
And it
Literally
seemed hip
takes
to
place
me.
in 94. Yeah.
Yeah, and it seems super hip. And it felt like it had a sort of a voice on social media and stuff like that where it connected with the younger people especially. And I think maybe that's the attempt here. But at the same time, I'm saying this like, oh, it could be a generational thing and maybe it's for younger people, but that's not didn't seem like the intention. Like I'm looking at one of those quotes from the director. I can say that every corner of this movie during the making of it, we have been aware of how to service fans. Have you heard anything like that before from a director?
No, that seems pretty antithetical to what had previously been the standard response is like we don't we don't want to cater to everything like the classic example I think of is when Damon Lindelof was making Lost and
Yeah.
essentially the internet was really pressuring like certain things to happen, and if anything I feel like directors and showrunners had traditionally kind of wanted to always push back against that, not give in to that
Yeah.
craven toxic fandom. But that's also like literally one of the subject matters of the film.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like, there's definitely we've crossed the Rubicon with that now.
Yeah.
There's another great quote here from the producer. Guy and James, these are the writers, have been mega Scream fans from day one, and their script was a love letter to Wes Craven and Kevin Williamson. Okay, like again, that just like seems so on the nose with like, oh, we want this to be loved by this group of fans, blah blah blah. But then within the movie itself, like you said, there's this whole commentary on toxic fandom. The killers are ultimately fans of
Right.
the Stab franchise, so it's like, are you attacking us, or are you trying to cater? It's a very bizarre thing. And there's this another like from Filmmaker Magazine. This is Tyler Gillette, basically saying, the one thing we didn't necessarily expect or account for was how, over the course of making the film, we would find ourselves in these meta moments where it felt like the experience of making the movie was folding in on the movie itself. These sequences are so aware of a particular trope while simultaneously aware of the audience being aware of the trope. I mean, like, I'm even trying to get through that sentence. I was like, what? I get what he's saying. I really do.
Right.
But it's sort of like, it almost feels like the filmmakers and the writers got lost in this kind of
Exactly.
self-reflexive loop of commentary, and it's the postmodern nightmare.
And I mean, we've discussed this on the show. One of the reasons that the original Scream worked so well is that while Williamson had that kind of meta postmodern edge to his screenplay, I mean, it was soaked in it through and through.
Yeah.
By pairing it with Wes Craven, like a classicist in very
100%.
much the sense of the term, going all the way back to the 70s, it's you have that kind of balance to it. And that's one of the things that just made this new iteration feel so empty, is that there's not any sense of balance between a true like risk-taking forward marching thrill ride and the academic commentary. It just felt like if there was any kind of just like marching forward, it felt like lockstep, like phoning it in, which was probably the most frustrating aspect of it.
I mean, I guess I'll disagree with you there. I didn't feel like they were phoning it in. I felt like what you're talking about is like the distinction between like Williamson and Craven. Like that was the magic mix, right? And that's spot on. I would agree with that. Here, it almost seems like, yes, there is this academic sort of discourse about sequels and legacy sequels and requels and whatever. That's huge and happening throughout the entire thing. And then the second part of it is that it's, it is a love letter to the Scream franchise and Wes Craven and what he did. And then there's just nothing else. And so it's like, I think those things that was the goal, and they hit that goal right on. Mm-hmm. And there was a sort of craftsman-like quality to the movie, I thought at least, where it seemed like, oh yeah, like they're hitting their marks, like these scenes are interesting. But like at its core, there's just nothing there to prop it up, which is so bizarre. Because I mean, even one of the directors, where is this quote where he talks about, one of the reasons that the original Scream was so good is because it was scary. Ghostface was scary.
Right.
And this is Matt, one of the directors. He says, let's make a Ghostface as scary as we possibly can, because it's one of those things we love so much about the original. Even though it can be goofy sometimes or close to being goofy, we focus on how you balance that so it's that true to the Ghostface, but also scary as possible. It's like, what did you find any of this scary?
I'd say the one not scary, but there was that I think the only time the suspense was really effective is that the daytime scene I mentioned.
Yeah.
But it's also like that's what made the first two Screams so intense, was not just like trying to like I feel like that's weird that he's like putting the goofy comment off to the side in
Yeah.
that quote. Like true to Ghostface, but also scary. Like that's what made Ghostface so appealing over the course of the franchise, is that he is like both this ominous presence, but completely incompetent at following through and killing Sidney Prescott.
Yeah.
And that humor part is really missing so much throughout the film, because it's either A, wrapped up in the academic stuff, or B, like eschewed in favor of the dimly lit and kind of by the numbers. And that's where I felt it felt phoned in. Like, for instance,
Okay.
spoilers abound, but like Dewey Cox's death, like that should they really wanted to, and like Brian Taylor is doing some heavy lifting as the composer in that scene, where it's just like we're trying to make this like a real big legacy moment, but it just feels so rote. Whereas that scene in the daytime and with the character Wes, opening and closing cupboards and the fridge, like that actually felt like both honestly clever and suspenseful, and that's where that tone really worked, and I didn't find it much anywhere else in the film. Did you like? I mean, I've made some concessions. Like, clearly I'm a fan of that middle part of the film.
Yeah.
What parts do you think worked, if at all?
Oh God. Now you're gonna put me on the spot. I don't know if any of it worked, if I'm being
Yeah.
totally honest. And it's not because it's like they're bad filmmakers or anything like that. I think the conceit of this whole thing, well, we have to, the elephant in the room here is the lead, Melissa Barrera, who I think is a good actor, by the way. She was in The Heights, right?
Yeah, she's great
She's
in The
great
Heights,
in
I
The
think.
Heights.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened in the casting process, but like the main character here has to be very nuanced emotionally. And in those scenes, whether it was their direction or the writing, or she just wasn't the right fit for this, none of it worked at all.
Yeah. No.
Like the emotional thing with Billy Loomis being her father, like what?
Oh, God.
And then don't get me started on the hallucination. I mean, this thing was essentially doomed from the start, because one, there was no goal here of creating like a truly original slasher movie. That was never the intention. And like, how are you supposed to make a good movie if you don't even start out wanting to make a good movie? You know what I mean? Like, they basically wanted to make this wink wink kind of fun thing where if you're a Scream fan, you're going to love it. Can anybody who's not a Scream fan watch this and understand anything that's happening?
I often wondered that. Like, I even thought about like my students that saw the original Scream. Most of them very much enjoyed it. Like, they don't seem to have much of any interest in Scream 5, because one, it doesn't have that kind of 90s throwback feel to it, and also like they they don't want to really do the homework of watching 2, 3, 4. So like there does, like you said, I mean, there's another quote in here about them, the filmmakers wanting to really stay true to that idea that if you're gonna make a Scream movie, you do have to take risks, and that's where I feel like they really didn't.
They whiffed it, man.
Right, like
what risk did they take? I don't know, man. Did you see the new Ghostbusters?
Not yet. No. Afterlife. No.
Yeah, Afterlife. there's a scene at the end of that you might walk out of your own house as you're watching it and be like, this is awful. Like, this is
Yeah.
the worst of this sort of legacy reboots. It's a terrible scene involving the ghosts of some of the Ghostbusters. It's completely absurd. This movie unfortunately feels like that. The whole
Yeah.
thing feels like it's this weird facsimile of it's like a facsimile of fan fiction.
Yeah.
And it's like what they're trying to criticize is exactly what they're doing.
Right.
Like the killers are inspired because they want to make a new plot for Stab whatever 8 or 9 because it's not like, that's number one, a really dumb motivation. And kind of like when you go, it's so interesting because I went back to the original and watched it and I was just completely blown away by how much better it was than the other movies. Like, it's not even in the same league. Like, Scream 2 is like in a different universe than Scream. And the thing is, Scream already did this. Like, ultimately they were inspired by films to kill people. Yeah, sure, there's some about his mother, blah blah blah. Obviously that didn't matter. It was the inspiration from the films that makes it so interesting. That's actually why the MPA gave it an R instead of an NC-17, because they liked the messaging that like movies make you kill people. I mean, West didn't intend it for that, but he was fine with that happening. And this is like, and I was looking at all the other movies and stuff, and it's like Scream 5 has nowhere to go. Like, Scream 4 essentially was a fun comedy, but it's not really a horror movie at that point. It's more of a parody of a parody. The only way that Scream 5 could have really worked, I think, is that you would have to really disconnect it from the other films way more than they did.
Yeah.
And it's just Melissa's character, Sam Carpenter, like being connected to Billy. It just seemed so middle schoolish.
Right.
If you were asked like a middle schooler to write a sequel to Scream, like, this is what they come up with. I'm sounding terrible. I'm being really mean. I don't mean to. I don't mean to be mean, but that's what it feels like to me. It's like, it's almost, I think, for me, so disappointing, because I know these guys are great filmmakers. I know these guys are good writers and they can come up with something. Why do you feel like they felt boxed in or something?
Yeah, well, I was gonna say actually that it feels that they kind of had these, because it felt rushed to me too. It feels overstuffed, it feels undercooked, and like they are just kind of going with whatever. Like, they had this modest hit, or at least name recognition now because of Ready or Not, and they get this chance. And I mean, just like I would, they ran with it, but they ran too fast and too far, and you wind up, like you said earlier with the quote about the Ouroboros of it all. They get lost in it, and so there's no real structure to guide to rein them in. So it is the phrase "boxed in" feels almost paradoxical, because like they've boxed themselves in by not like actually giving themselves any real guidance. And or like you said earlier, the guidance is overly simple. It's just like love letter to both the fans and the original filmmakers. I think that you also hit something on a nail on the head when you say like a facsimile of fan fiction. I think there's some really telling quotes in some of these press circuit interviews. One from David Arquette, who said when he originally received the first draft of the script, he said, "My concerns were some of the other things that were in there that, in my opinion, weren't very Dewey. Like, I understood him being in a dark place, but never thought he was a drinker." That also just like threw me for a loop, just like, nerdy, introverted Dewey Cox, like as like a retired drunk in a trailer. It didn't hit for me. And then also, there's the COVID aspect, of course. Like, they're filming this in a very like disconnected way, from Nev Campbell saying to the Hollywood Reporter that she always loved sitting by the monitor and being with the directors and seeing what the shots were and discussing what they're looking for, but like because of the COVID protocols, which are understandable and admirable, there was this kind of clinical feel to it. She had to sit in another room with a monitor, and she didn't really get to collaborate, especially since she was more of a side character this time around. Like, she doesn't actually appear in the film until the midway point. And that just, and there's this rushed feeling to it too. Like, you have to get things done. Editor Michelle Aller talked about how, you know, she had to turn things around very quickly because, you know, the cast only initially got the first 80 pages of the script, and they wanted to see if they could get the initial scene, the initial house where the opening attempt at the kill occurs with Sam's little sister. And then you have also the biggest issue, I think, with why the final act doesn't work. And I couldn't quite place my finger on it until I saw this quote, which is that it's not even the original house, even though they go at so much
Talk about facsimile.
length. Yeah, they go to so much length in the script to like point out the fact that this is Stu Macher's house, and it doesn't look like it. Like, it doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't. I thought it was bizarre. Yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, because that's such an establishing shot. Multiple times Wes does that, where he like pulls out from the house, especially at the end.
Yeah. And it's like in
it's
the
a
middle
house
of
on the hill,
nowhere.
isolated. Yeah.
Right. It feels like that. And that's the thing. It's like Wes is so good about that sense of place. Right. And we talk about this in the episode regarding Last House on the Left. Like, even though it's like, you know, so micro budget and low quality, like, he's always been a master of that sense of place. And the cinematographer speaks to this too. And I think, not to harp on it, this will be the last time I mention it, with that, you know, the character of Wes's house and his mom, Judy, that actually felt like lived in, carefully, you know, blocked and lit and shot. But every other scene, from the hospital to the initial attack opening of the film to the, you know, climactic finale, all of that feels so just like full of medium shots and dim lighting, and it's frustrating. It feels lacking.
Yeah. And I love this quote you have here about Melissa Barrera and shooting the scenes with a tennis ball.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's maybe goes back to your question, like, how is she good in The Heights but not good here? And I think that's one of the things that I remember reading about from I don't remember if it was Williamson or Craven, but like the actor who played the original like Ghostface voice, you know, like he'd actually be there talking on the phone, and they'd you know, ADR the lines in later, but like, you got some like actual, you know, interaction and fear going on with the various characters. We're on the phone with Ghostface, but something feels off from the opening scene with the little sister, and that's why
it just
I think.
didn't have that spark. But I feel like we're in the minority though, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you look at like all this audience stuff and critic stuff, and you know, what's the RT score? Rotten Tomato score is 81%. Cinema score was a B plus, which is pretty strong. The Scream 2 got a B plus, Scream 3 and 4 got a B and B minus. So it's one of the better received ones right out of the gate. Letterboxd is at 70, which is pretty good. IMDb dropped a lot because I did the notes initially when I first saw it, and the IMDb was at like 76, which is very high. That was in the first week of release, I think, and then it dropped down to 66. Metacritic audience was a small sample, 71, and then Google was way lower at like I want to say like 60 something, and it jumped up to 84%. So it's all over the map. I mean, critics seem to like it. 76% all critics, 62% top critics, so a little bit lower there. 67% overall score, which is decently strong, and then a Metacritic of 60. Obviously, there's a discrepancy between critics and fans, and normal audience, I should say. Critics are a little bit more critical and see some of these problems, but you know, it's a success. It's just passing, I think, about $80 million probably this weekend. I think it's over 130 worldwide, shot for about 24 million. A big marketing budget, though, let's be honest. So it's definitely going to be profitable, and we're going to get a sequel out of it. Are we just being curmudgeons? Are we too old for this movie?
You have to account. I mean, probably is the short answer, but
Yeah.
I think you have to account for the fact that of all the kinds of films that feel necessary to the movie theater experience, horror movies have to be near, or if not at the
Yeah,
top of the list, right?
definitely.
Um, and the fact that this is maybe one of the first like real hits that isn't Spider-Man after so many months of the exhibition industry languishing. Of course it makes sense that this is the movie that people are actually liking and seeing and talking about, even if it's not super well done. It's at least like there like I'm glad I saw it. Like I think that I was moderately entertained. And if I'm a curmudgeon and I'm moderately entertained, even though afterwards I'm like, oh, these are the things I don't like about it, and laundry list, hour-long podcast, let's go. There's gotta be tons of people that are just like, the movies, right? Like,
Yeah. No, totally. Yeah, I'm being overly harsh to both of us. Because like our Chaser movie, Happy Death Day,
mhm.
which came out in 2017, is one of my favorite slasher movies. And it's a film that doesn't do a whole lot, isn't really all that new or interesting. It takes a really kind of funny idea, like Groundhog's Day meets Scream, and just plays with it and goes for it. And it's incredibly entertaining and great, but it feels like it has a spark to it, right?
Right.
Now, did you see Happy Death Day when it came out?
No, I actually didn't see, and I still haven't seen the second one. I saw Happy Death Day for the first time like just 2 or 3 years ago. I think it was
Yeah,
actually like 2 years ago, and it was just one of those things where I'm like, I heard it's fun, but it didn't seem like much, or quote, very important, and
yeah,
I brushed it off. But yeah, when I finally saw it, the one of the things that's so great about the movie is that it has that kind of briskness to it that
yes,
is missing in a lot of modern day horror,
yeah,
where it's just like you watch it and then it's like over in a flash, and it's really like vibrant that way. And because
exactly.
it
Yeah.
takes such a simple premise and does it with the time loop, um, it has the gimmick quality to it. But horror movies are meant to, in some way, be kind of trashy, and so with even like the line about have you seen Groundhog Day at the end of the film, I mean, the movie is painfully self-aware, but it doesn't relish in it. It just
No,
like
definitely
does its
not.
job. It's very utilitarian.
Well, how would you compare Happy Death Day then to Scream 5? Like, where's the overlap in the self-aware sort of filter that we're going through now?
There's this I was trying to put my finger on it while I rewatched Happy Death Day again just earlier today, and maybe you can help me put some language to this. There's this kind of this schlocky glossiness
Yeah,
that it works when it's in service of like a transparently schlocky premise.
yeah,
And maybe this is like you are very much more of a Blumhouse expert than I. That feels like uh, can be a blessing or a curse depending on who's helming it. I think that Christopher Landon, the director of Happy Death Day, and he obviously went on to do the sequel, and another kind of uh, critically acclaimed schlockfest, Freaky, which I still have to see also.
oh, it's just great.
Yeah, I keep hearing. I the one that's another one where I'm just gonna be like, I'm gonna do it someday, and I'm sure I'm gonna like it. But it often falls into the wrong hands so often, and I think that's unfortunately what happened more with Scream 5, because I totally get like this kind of trashy feel to it, but when you combine it with like this postmodern academic kind of attempt, then it just falls flat.
It's very sterile almost, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think Happy Death Day is a great example of the Blumhouse model. It was made for essentially $5 million, which is what Blumhouse does. Here's $5 million. The thing that he does that's a lot different is to be like, I'm not going to talk to you again. Here's $5 million. I'm not giving you a cent more. Do whatever you need to do and like get it done. And there's a looseness and a freedom there But I'm not necessarily I'm not sure that Spyglass was on set every day with the guys at Scream 5. Like I almost feel like the Blumhouse model it works because of the looseness and the openness it gives to creatives, the director and everybody involved. I feel like Scream 5, I feel like they put themselves in a box.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're talking about like the fan service and want to do it for Wes and Kevin Williamson being executive producer. It feels like there is a lot of pressure there. Where I guarantee you with Happy Death Day, there was little to no pressure whatsoever. It was like, hey, this might do well. It did really well. Like $5 million ended up being $125 million in the box office. It was a smash hit. We got a sequel. It sounds like we're going to get a third one, I think, in your notes. Jason Blum's hinting at that. I think it's like, and this also, reminds me a bit of something I was reading when I did rewatch Scream. I went back and read a lot of articles just because I was interested. And the thing that came up over and over again when they were talking about the production of Scream was that like, oh, we thought this was a small movie.
Yeah.
We just thought this was like Wes and, was getting another chance to do a horror movie. Is kind of like he had this last movie didn't do very well. And so there wasn't a lot of pressure necessarily, and there wasn't a lot of expectation. And I think that like that pressure and expectation can really constrict the creative process. And honestly, I think that's the issue with Scream 5 is it wanted to do a lot of different things, but didn't do the most basic thing, which is tell a good story.
Right.
Like, what's the story of Scream? I couldn't even tell you what the plot is.
No,
like, it's just like so dumb.
Going back to your comment about the motivation of the killers, initially that was one of the things that bummed me out about Happy Death Day, just on my first watch, where it was like I had a lot of fun, but like at the end it's just like, oh, it's over a guy. But then like the line that hit really hard for me this time around, because maybe especially because I saw it on the heels of Scream 5, was like the villain it turns out to be her roommate, and she says she says that, the thing about the guy, and then he's like, but also it's because you're a dumb bitch, and and then you have the final like that's hilarious.
But it's again that it's this lightness to the whole thing.
Yeah, and which also reflects the original Scream.
Correct.
Because there is that, arguably deep, naughty discourse about the influence of movies on real life violence, but then a similar kind of thing, like Stu's whole line of like peer pressure, and then Billy Loomis, saying like ultimately it's not the movies that made us kill, but they just helped us be more creative.
Yeah, sort of.
Well, it's like, yeah, it's brilliant. It's hilarious and it's smart because it finds that way to give the characters motivation and then also give the movie something to be about. It doesn't have that overstuffed kind of, wild ensemble that Scream 5 does, which also Happy Death Day has that like very slimmed down cast where it basically just becomes about this one person. I think that it is weird. It does feel like such a mindfuck that it's both like Scream 5 is boxed in and also doesn't have any like aim or purpose.
Yeah, it's kind of bizarre. It at the end of the day, like all they really had to do was tell a genre story, which is not that hard. Like it's a slasher movie.
Yeah,
like Final Girl. You could have a final. I mean, you could do the whole Scream thing, and obviously they did this in the beginning with sort of fake kill. But like, why? They also screwed the formula.
Yeah.
Right. Like all you needed was like it should do like Sidney Prescott's daughter or something. Or her niece. I mean, her niece was in 4, right? 2.
Yeah.
Whatever. Do it again. I don't care. Do her nephew. It doesn't matter. The whole point is none of it matters as long as you hit your marks.
Yeah.
Which is like paint by numbers storytelling. Just do it. Just give me a protagonist, have them go through stuff, have them survive, and then kill the killer at the end. Why the killer kills is completely irrelevant.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean anything.
And there was no there's no punchline to the we wanted to have an inspiration for correcting the Stab franchise.
like how is that even?
Yeah, and like two killers meet on Reddit and
dread it even. the
Oh,
horror subreddit, right? Which is so specific, and I frequent
oh
it every
gosh.
day. I
But
go there.
there's so much. That's the thing is like they get close to it, right? Like there is
Yeah.
something there to say about like the internet, and I don't know.
What
It
does it say
just
about self-aware horror though? Like if we view it from like the big,
mhm, mhm.
sort of subject matter here and the holistic perspective that we need to take. What does Scream 5 say about self-aware horror and whether it works or doesn't work?
Well, I think like that goes back to the distinction between Scream 5 and Happy Death Day, which
Yeah.
is, trying to make something fun and memorable and iconographic that fits within the, enjoyable limitations of the genre. And ultimately, I would still say the original Scream is heads and shoulders above Happy Death Day. But if
Yes.
we're at this point, this nadir of horror, like all we can do is like find something that's like gruesomely effective.
Yeah.
And I don't know. We haven't even touched the. There's so many elephants in the room when it comes to Scream 5.
Yeah.
The use of the term elevated horror.
Oh god, do we have? Yeah, we have to. I think at least
I think
mention
that
it.
I think that makes sense where to end this
Well, it's
because
yeah. So to explain in the opening,
Mhm,
essentially
mhm.
to mimic the discussion of horror movies like Drew Barrymore was, and those were 70s and 80s slashers. What's her name? Jen Ortega.
Mhm.
She's supposedly the first victim here, although she survives. And they start talking about elevated horror. What does she say? She's not into it, or she is into it. I can't
No,
remember it.
she isn't. She doesn't watch that. She doesn't watch the stab movies because they're cliched and stereotypical.
Yeah.
She only watches. She's more into elevated horror. Like she specifically names like the Babadook is her favorite movie, and she could name any. She could answer any questions about It Follows or The Witch or
Which
Hereditary.
all my favorite movies. I
But
mean,
so that's it. Like I guess that's our question. Do is there a world where you can be self-aware but still be quote elevated? Cuz like the thing about those films, It Follows, etc., is that while they are in some way self-aware by just like repurposing a lot of elements of the horror genre, they
yeah,
don't specifically name it in the script, right? Kind of like when we had a discussion about 28 Days Later. Like
yeah,
it's soaked in influence and inspiration from Romero, but they never say the word zombie. They never say,
no,
oh, I feel like I'm in Night of the Living Dead. Like that would be
yeah.
dumb. Like I think that whole did that whole like a chance to be obliquely self-aware die in the turn of the century?
Yes, 100%. I think that being explicitly self-aware in the universe of filmmaking made sense between like I don't know 92 and 2002 maybe.
Yeah, short window, short window.
Yeah, because like now it's like that was an interesting sort of postmodern technique and movement, and Wes Craven was part of that. New Nightmare. I mean, come on, definitely a precursor to Scream. Uh, yeah, nowadays it's like and let's bring it back to Cabin in the Woods.
No.
Cabin in the Woods essentially does that, but they don't really name movies, do they?
No, just tropes,
Just
right?
tropes, yeah. Um, and in that sense, like to me, that was definitely, and I've said this many times on this whole cycle, that was the end point of the whole Scream movement,
Yeah.
and sort of being meta and trying to explicitly comment on the genre, conspicuously, right? Saying stuff out loud, doing it. What I find so strange about like, especially them kind of going after elevated horror here is what are they trying to say about elevated horror? Like, what are they trying to critique? I always find that so strange because the reason why Scream worked is because it critiqued a cycle of films that weren't very good, but very popular.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was easy to sort of make fun of them as like, oh, these stupid, like all these things in the Friday the 13th and all these sequels, blah, blah, blah. Like there was a satirical sort of bullseye to hit. What's the bullseye to hit with I mean, Ari Aster's maybe a little bit different. I think you could do some parody of him pretty easily, but like, It Follows, The Witch, it doesn't. Where's the meat on the bones of the irony there?
Yeah.
Where's the comedic payoff of making fun of those movies? I just don't see it.
Yeah.
I don't see like what the real target is.
And that's the thing is like, It Follows is steeped in, an allegory about STDs, and as the characters explain in Scream 5, Babadook is very much about mother's grief. Like, we've kind of come back through so that we're back in the era of like The Exorcist
Yeah.
and the movies that like started this whole genre. But we're in a more, I don't know, it's stupid that there's a name that's easily mockable for this type of horror movie, and yet it doesn't like, I want more movies that are of the quality of
Yeah.
The
Give me
Witch,
more,
and
another
like,
Get Out. Get me another Raw.
yeah,
Like that. Those are the types of movies that like, they're just really good horror movies. And like, yeah, you could parody them, I guess, but like, what's the point? And that's why I think, I don't know. I just feel like I'm dreading Scream 6.
yeah, but we're
Like,
gonna see it.
of course I'm going to see it, but like there's no way it's going to be good.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it felt to me like Scream 5, just in terms of self-aware horror, is that brick wall.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right? It's like we hit the brick wall cabin in the woods. It's like, okay, this is enough. Like, just stop. And that's how we got to elevated horror, because that was 2012-ish, right? And then all of a sudden, It Follows comes out in 2014, The Witch in like 2016, I think. Raw was 2016, I think. That's what sort of sparked this sort of, okay, we need to do something different. Scream 5 feels like it's trying to be Scream 4 back in 2011.
Yes,
It just doesn't feel like it's moved past. It's not, for a film that is so self-aware about Scream, it seems almost completely oblivious to the discourse of horror film. Like, it just doesn't get it at all about where it's been going and where it's been the last decade. And I don't know, it just comes across as it was a very valiant attempt to do something in honor of Wes Craven, and I think they failed pretty miserably across the board.
Yeah, I think that there's a telling moment in the film when it feels like a moment that should have been a huge laugh. And I don't know about maybe your audience was a little more
they're pretty lively.
Okay, they're but in my audience, over a month after the film came out, and a pretty small crowd, but it the moment when Sydney says like, "There's no way I'll go back to Woodsboro," and then she shows up, and she shows up in this moment where it's like, Dewey Cox, this legacy character, has finally died. Like, they're for a movie that is about self-awareness, it doesn't seem like it's self-aware of like how much that could have been a comedic payoff.
Yeah.
Of like Sidney Prescott literally saying she's never returning to Woodsboro, and then she comes back to Woodsboro.
Yeah. I think there's almost too much respect for Scream. Right? There's too much there's too much that, like, they're
right. They didn't take enough risk.
Yeah, you gotta break, what's the term? Like, kill your idols, kill your heroes?
Yeah.
Something like that. They just didn't do that. You have to do it, right? Like, you have to do something new. You have to sort of bury these old films and say, that's cool that they did this, but like, I want to do something different and new. And they never really did that.
Right. They could have killed Dewey Cox in the opening scene. Like, he comes to try to save Jenna Ortega, and Ghostface offs him right there. Like,
yeah,
that would have
been the final, the initial kill, in terms of just like him going after him in itself. Although that reminds me of Lev Shriver in Scream 3, which I hate that opening scene.
True. And that's the thing, is like they like you said, they kind of drew themselves into a corner, because there's so many things that 2, 3, and 4 already did. So like,
it's almost like, they were right to say the no more. The cow has been milked.
Oh, it feels. Oh God, that's a sad, sentiment to end on. That a Weinstein was right, but I guess that's
and in this case, it's sort of. But I do think that there was potential here to do something interesting, with the Scream franchise, and I think there's a balance between being self-aware and meta and actually making a good movie.
Yep.
And Wes got that, and Kevin got that in the beginning, and they fought about it on set about it, literally. But it was that conflict between those two sort of elements of making a self-aware movie that worked out in the end. Whereas with I think Scream 5, it failed in that sense, and Happy Death Day I think was a big win with that. But the stakes were so low.
Yes, exactly. It was a script that had been on the shelves forever, and it's just like, and it has this kind of like dusted off feeling to it. And look at what we have now. Like after Happy Death Day, we had Edge of Tomorrow and Palm Springs, and like sometimes the lower stakes, like the old ideas, are tried and true and are clever enough still to like spark a little mini movement, a little mini subgenre. And I'm glad that at least we have that, and we have still like brilliant filmmakers doing horror in a respectful and meaningful way. I think that we'll see both of those. We'll have both our Saint Mods and our Malignants for years to come. I don't need Scream 6.
I don't need Scream 6. Awesome. Any final thoughts here? Because this is the first episode of our self-aware horror cycle.
Yeah, probably programming note for listeners. We recorded all these episodes for this cycle, all about self-aware horror. We'll dole them out to you a little faster than we typically had before. But we want to make sure that we have it all done so we can have kind of these bigger conversations about the overall evolution. So keep listening. We'll have episodes about everything from Wes Craven's Last House to the Left to Cabin in the Woods by Drew Goddard and Joss Whedon, as well as really interesting discussions with some great guests. So I'm excited to get all these out here and also look at what might we put together for the spring and summer.
Awesome. Thanks for listening. This has been Film Trace.